Welcome back to Shapes of Grief. Today I'm joined by Rosie Mankes from the United States. Rosie, you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. It's lovely to have you here, Rosie. And I love that we're continuing on the theme of a recent podcast episode I had, which is ambiguous loss. You know, the losses that we can encounter when somebody hasn't died, yet something has changed dramatically and something has been lost, even though it's not a death. And you're going to be talking to us about your mother and moving her into an assisted care facility.
Yes.
So tell us first about your mom and what was your relationship with her like, Rosie?
So my mom was like my best friend. I mean, I spoke to her every single day. We had a really loving relationship. She taught me the fundamentals of being a mom when I had my own children. She was a really no-nonsense kind of woman. She helped me to break down problems when I was struggling with things. I'm Italian by heritage. She taught me how to cook. She also taught me the importance of sitting with somebody when they're having a meal. Like if my children, growing up for myself, actually, when I was a child, if I was to sit to eat lunch, she would stop what she was doing if she could to sit, because she thought it was so important to spend time with people when they're eating, especially in the Italian culture. And, you know, then throughout my adult life, I had my mom through my childhood, of course, as well. And about 10 years ago, it's kind of like a slow and painful kind of grief when you lose somebody, not the physical presence, but that person, that one that was the person that you would go to when you were struggling, or you would go to share a happy experience, and they start to slip away from you piece by piece mentally. And that's what we've been experiencing for the last 10 years now.
Okay, so your mother was diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
Yes. At the beginning, it was just forgetfulness. And we started to notice, I live in New Jersey and my mom lived in Brooklyn, New York. So it's not too far away, but far enough away that things were happening that we weren't aware of. So at the beginning, it was the forgetfulness, as I just shared, but it was also going to her house and seeing food rotting in her refrigerator or no food at all. We later discovered that she was eating cookies for dinner. Then we start to see that her clothes were soiled, so she wasn't laundering her clothing. Body odors. People with dementia, we learned that they don't like to go into the shower. Something about the shower is very adverse to them. And at the time, 10 years ago, she was still driving. So we thought that was dangerous. So I actually took her to a neurologist and had him give her a cognitive test, and she failed, which I knew she would. And he took her license away. And that was really, really hard for her because she really started driving later in life and she really loved her independence. But the fear was that she would not make it home, maybe forget how to get home, or worse yet, hurt herself or somebody else. So at that point, we started with like part-time help. We had somebody coming in like 3 times a week, and we tried to rationalize, well, you don't really need a license because the companion could take you where you need to go. Then as she started to progress in her illness, we got full-time 24/7 help for her. And then when her care level was up here and our ability was down here, then we made the transition to assisted living, and then 2 years ago into memory care.
So just to go back a bit, Rosie, when you realized, gosh, this is not getting better, this is getting worse, and you realized that the mom you knew was becoming a different version of her, and there would be losses as a result of that transition. What was that like for you?
It was very painful. You know, I think over the years, you build up a little bit of a tougher shell, but there's this whole transition from you becoming the parent and then they becoming the child. And, you know, this pushback about going into the shower and you having to, you know, like you would do with a child, having to tell them, you know, you need to go into the shower, you need to do this. So there was a lot of things that were, you know, my mom was the rock of the family. She was the strong one. And then, you know, my siblings lived out of town during that time. My brother moved to South Carolina. My sister lived part-time in New Jersey and part-time in Las Vegas. So a lot of the things I would see that would slip away. And there's a whole host of grief that goes with that, like that loss of that person. And it's just so hard to process. And, so many times I would cry and just be so sad about, the little pieces of her that somebody else would say, oh, she's just a little forgetful. But I would see the bigger things. I would see the things that were, my mom was always the one that wanted to gather people around a table, and get together. And I'd see her sitting alone in our family room, and everybody's gathered at the table. I'm like, Mom, come over. And she said, no, it's okay. And that wasn't her. That was not my mom. My mom was not that person. She was the gatherer. And that's how I became the gatherer of people. So learning by example.
So how did this progress for you, Rosie?
So it's a very different kind of grief, because it's not a physical loss that you can grieve. It's one that's personal, and it's piece by piece. And the progression was, we moved her into assisted living. There was a tremendous pushback. She did not want to leave the only life she ever knew, which was living independently in Brooklyn, and moved to a facility. And the day we moved her in was probably one of the hardest days ever, because these staff thought that she would just, transition. And she didn't transition for well over 10, 11 months. I want to go home, middle of the night phone calls, get me out of here, get the car, bring me home. And it was really, really tough. I mean, I went that year, I had a very difficult year with a couple of different things, which I'll share in a little while, but I was not eating, I was losing weight. And the staff of the place said in their combined, let's say 90 years of experience, let's say the nurse, the director, and the social worker, they had never seen anybody give so much pushback and fight as my mother did. So that was really tough. She eventually acclimated. She's been there now since 2015. So we'll be, coming on 7 years now that she's been there. And 2 years ago was when we really saw a big change, because that's when we went to memory care, which is like a fancy name for a nursing home. And as a family, my sister and I, my brother's no longer with us, but as a family, my sister and I pushed back tremendously. We thought that any semblance of her would wither when she went into memory care. And, there were a lot of things that we saw happening, and we realized that they were right. She needed to be in a more confined space with more supervision. One of the tipping points was that she was out and about with the residents in assisted living outside, and she thought she was trying to open the door, and she was pulling the fire alarm. So that was one of the tipping points that made us know that she needed to move into memory care. And it's still very difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's an awful disease. I'll say that there are some nights that she calls me 4 times and she'll say to me, I don't know where I am. How did I get here? What is this place? We're coming on 7 years. December will be 7 years. She's been living there. And there's so much fear. There's so much fear in her because of the progression of her disease. As a matter of fact, she was hospitalized right around Easter time this year. And she, anytime you take somebody that's at that point in the disease, when they're in the memory care, you take them out of their environment, there's a lot of agitation, a lot of confusion, a lot of where's my purse, who took my money, I'm sure you've heard before. I think I saw on your podcast that you lost your father, I believe, to dementia. And she was that person in the hospital that was screaming all day long, get me out of here. I want out of here. And what was most awful about that was that she had pneumonia, and she had also the flu, and they wouldn't let me come to the hospital because she was in isolation. So imagine putting somebody with dementia in an environment where they don't have a familiar face. So it's just really, really very difficult.
It's incredibly painful.
Yeah.
What was the impact on you, Rosie? Because you talked about, losing weight, you talked about the stress of it. Could you describe a little bit the impact for you on, you're not quite caring because you're not in there hands-on, but, managing your mother's care, I suppose, is the right term. What has that been like for you, and what impact has it had on you?
I think that at the beginning, as I shared earlier, I fell apart because it wasn't just the loss of my mother, as I said, not physically, but just the whole relationship. But during that year, from 2015 to 2016, it was from September of that year to the next. Not only did that happen with my mom, but I also had breast cancer and I had a double mastectomy. And then I also lost my brother, my second loss of my brother. I had a brother that died in 1993 and my other brother died in 2016 in a horrific accident. And when you put the three things together, I fell apart. I literally fell apart. I stopped eating. I stopped speaking. I didn't want to get out of bed and be me. I was in such a way that I felt cursed. I was worried about what might happen next. So I was just really in a bad space, and just recently came across a picture of what I looked like back then. And, you know, the whole thing with, imagine going for biopsies, lumpectomies, ultimately a bilateral mastectomy and reconstructive surgery. And all the while you're getting phone calls, get me out of here, I want to go home. And then my brother dies in this like freak accident that was completely avoidable as far as I'm concerned. So I literally just fell apart. But I didn't want to do that. Like I wanted to figure out how can I level up? How can I come back to being me? And it took a lot of time. Some people say, like, I listen to podcasts or I read sometimes, people say, top 10 ways to get yourself out of adversity or something like that, or a really fancy thing from medical journal. And that, that was not going to serve me. I've learned back then that it's not one big thing, big picture kind of thing that's going to fix you and help you to move out of that adversity or grief. It's a combination of many, many things. It's really building from the foundation up, trying to build yourself back, and not only build back, but look at the things you gave up when you're in that space. When you're in that really bottom place, you tend to give up things that give you joy. And how do you build them back up and bring them back into your life? And that's what I had to really work on myself,
It's an active process, isn't it? It's not a sit and wait or time will heal. I say this in a recent animation that I produced. It's not time that heals. It's what you do with your time. And it's so true. Things happen. And for some people, things happen in multiples. And I'm so sorry, Rosie, that you went through all of those losses and that significant diagnosis and the loss of your breasts and, major surgery. Now what? Isn't it? It's like that question, now what? Like if anyone would fall apart, any one of us would fall apart in those circumstances. Yeah. And it's like, do you remember, did you come to a decision point or, okay, either I'm going to drown in this or I have to find a way out? Did that moment appear for you? Or were
I think that really did. It was one of those things where I just couldn't see myself that being just me. I didn't share yet with you, but I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I had lung cancer in 2008. And so there was a part of me that said, both my cancers were found in very early stages. I didn't require treatment. And I felt that if God wanted me to stick around and migrate through 2 different cancers, then I have to become what I want to be. I have to become me again. And the discovery of self-care, like self-care, what is that? What does that even mean? And it's not even just like self-care, like I'll take a bubble bath today or read a book. Self-care sometimes would be, I would go to visit my mother and it was too heavy for me. I just felt like she just was saying, I want to go home. I got to go home. I want to go home. And the emotions were too much for me. And I would have to say, I just got a phone call from work, Mom, I have to leave. And I'd kiss her because I knew she was safe. And I knew that I kind of was the trigger for her. When I wasn't there, if I was like the person sneaking to take a peek at what she was doing, she was socializing and she was doing things. But when I came in, I was the route out. She felt I was the route back to home. Yeah. So I said, sometimes it's time to just go. You just need to go.
Yeah. And it's so true that self-care is not about bubble baths and candles. Mm-hmm. It's really fundamentally about having a relationship with yourself, listening to your own needs. You check it. It's like you say there in that Italian culture, sitting down with someone while they're eating. What about sitting down with ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
How am I doing now? What do I need? What are my stress levels at? For some people, they've never done that. And when we're faced with extreme adversity or difficult situations in our lives, we are forced to have to confront that part of ourselves if we want to survive it. You know, we have to adapt strategies to grow around our loss.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit more about that. You said self-care and, you know, removing yourself from your mom when it was getting too much for you. What else did that look like for you?
So, you know, at the very early stages, you know, I had always been somebody that practiced gratitude. You know, I have this bracelet. I didn't put it on today because I figured every time I would put my arm down, I'd be clanking, but it's called the gratitude bracelet, the blessings bracelet, actually. And it has 4 beads on it. And every day I do acknowledge 4 blessings in my life. But back then, when I was telling you earlier about building that fundamental, that ground level, I decided one day to sit down and write 5 things that make me happy. And I say things because people in my life made me happy. But, you know, I'm in a really bad space at this point. Remember, now I've lost my breast, my mother, and my brother in a 1-year period of time. So I decided to sit down and write this list. And it was so basic and so like rudimentary. It was like sitting on the couch with the fireplace on with the dog snuggled next to me, you know, feeling the warmth of them, you know, or lighting 3 scented candles and turning the lights out to watch them glimmer, or even drinking your morning beverage and savoring the taste. Like these are kind of like mindful things as well as things that could make you happy. Watching a sunset or sunrise, or taking a walk, even if it's just around the block, because I'm recovering from major surgery at that point, right? So just going around the block is a big deal. So I'm looking at this list and I'm like, this is a pretty good list, but it's things that I'm not really that happy. Like, so how do I integrate them? I'm not doing them. So I believe very much in visualization. And I also believe in just like affirmations. So I just would say them over and over and visualize myself doing them and then integrate them into my life. And then when that list was over, I would figure out a different list. But also, as I shared before, you give up things when you're in a really bad space, when you're grieving, you give up things. And one of the things I did, and I stopped turning the radio on because I couldn't imagine like singing along to a song or connecting with lyrics. But music is very important to me. Like I listen to music and the lyrics of songs really speak directly to me. And I gave it up at a time when I probably needed it most.
You know, I hear that so often from people. They stop listening to music.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting.
I did. And I decided that I would bring music back into my life. And I said, let me start with the songs from when we were teenagers, like the simple songs, like things to me would be like Billy Joel or Jim Croce. And then I went for gusto. When I say lyrics that speak to me, like Let It Be or Drops of Jupiter by Train, and I integrated them back into my life. But I have to say that probably one of the bigger things was when I found meditation and mindfulness. Somebody said to me back 6 years ago, this is 6 years ago now, oh, you should meditate. Like, I have a marching band going on in my head. There's no way I can meditate. But I started out 10 minutes a day, and I use an app called Headspace, which I think is now worldwide. And actually, this past month, I celebrated 15,000 minutes meditating with Headspace, which is a lot of meditation. But mindfulness was even more so because at that point in my life, I was worrying and obsessing about past decisions I had made. Was it the right decision? And plotting and planning and scheming futures. And the best place to be sometimes is where your feet are planted, exactly where your feet. And I learned this acronym and I use it still today. I'll use it. It's called STOP. It says stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed. And the questions I'll say to myself are, you know, something like, is this thought really serving me well in this moment? And then another one would be, is it true? And the third would be, what do I really need now? And chances are that what I really needed to just get back to where I am and stay there and, you know, focus on what's really relevant and happening in the here and now.
Yeah.
And that's really helped me a lot with my whole grief and my healing of through this journey.
I think what you're really describing, and the fact that, you know, your mom is still alive, you're not grieving the loss of a person, you're grieving the loss of her personality and who she was to you and the relationship that you had in the past. But it's the kind of grief, it's the kind of ongoing loss, like it's an ambiguous loss, but it's also an anticipatory loss. At some stage, you know, somebody will die. But anxiety can be such a key feature from these types of ongoing losses and multiple losses. It's like, I've got cancer, my brother has died suddenly, you know, my mom's developed this disease. Is anything stable? Where's my solid ground? Where's predictability? And I think the dysregulation that comes from that in our nervous system is really profound. And it's something that a lot of people don't realize. They understand grief to be sadness following the death of someone we love. But we know, and anyone who's listened to the podcast knows, it's much more multifaceted than that. And anxiety, managing a very dysregulated nervous system, is really what it boils down to. And not only managing it, but how do I grow my synapses back? How do I grow back my skin? You know, someone described it, Linda, a few episodes ago. She said, it's like my nervous system was on the outside. You know, the people have different ways of describing it, but how do I, you know, build enough practices or habits to develop a skin again, you know, to develop, I don't want to say a thicker skin, because, you know, being sensitive is okay, but to feel safe in the world again, to be, you know, that French expression, bien dans son peau, to be good in your skin. That's really what we're looking at achieving, which is a process. It can take time. Who am I now that I've been shook up and dysregulated? And how do I develop the capacity to regulate myself again?
I agree. And I want to just share two different examples of how things were treated at one point in my life and how they're treated now. So I mentioned that I lost two brothers. So my brother Tommy died in 1993, and my brother Carl died in 2016. And in 1993, watching my mom walk into, you know, a funeral place and having to see her son was probably one of the hardest things I ever had to see in my life. And no one should ever bury a child. But in 2016, my mother's dementia had progressed to the point that she couldn't put time together. She didn't know if she had spoken to Carl, my other brother that passed away in 2016, in a day, a week, a month. So she couldn't put it together. So we collectively decided that we weren't going to share that she lost another child. And right or wrong, you know, people will agree or disagree, but she forgets. So we'd be just constantly reminding her of a sad thing. So there's a whole thing that goes along with that too, is that we were protecting her, so she still thinks he's alive. As a matter of fact, my sister sent her flowers from my brother and his wife on her birthday, which is June 8th. She turned 92. But then at the same time, we never really grieve it because we're keeping him alive, right? So, but we're doing it for the right reasons as far as we feel. So that's one example of how we've tried to preserve and protect her. The second is 2008, I had a stage 1A lung cancer and I had 10% of my right lung removed. And my mom was well at that time. So she dropped everything in her life and came to help take care of my young family. But then in 2016, when I had breast cancer and ultimately a bilateral mastectomy and reconstructive surgery, I didn't share it with her because I didn't want her to know that her youngest daughter had cancer again. So we were protecting her. Like, so in a way, it was self-care for us too, because we didn't have to make her go through these significant things.
And it's such a tricky one, Rosie, because, you know, all research says that when it comes to sharing information with people, you know, honest, age-appropriate truth is the best approach. But with this, it's so different. And I actually don't know what the evidence says about people with dementia, but I know that I did similar with my father, you know, in the last few months of his life, which would have been early last year. He regularly looked for my mother. And I didn't want to keep reminding him, well, actually, Dad, she's dead, you know, and I took to saying, she's probably resting, which felt like a half truth. Anyway, you know, and he would say, oh, probably, and that was it, you know. But it's I don't know what the right answer there is. And if anyone listening has any words of wisdom to shine on this, when somebody has dementia, you know, what versions of the truth are best for them, you know?
Yeah, I had a family member that lives across the country say, oh, that's so wrong. You need to tell her that. And I said, well, then you skip off to, you know, your state and live your life. And we have to live with her reliving this grief all the time. And no, we're not going to do that. It's just not in the cards for us to do that.
Yeah.
Because you're not in the day-to-day. So you don't get a vote. Sorry.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Like regarding dementia, I don't know enough about it to know what is the recommended process, but it's heartbreaking either way. So what's it like for you, Rosie, to keep your brother alive in that way with your mom?
So of course it was much more difficult back earlier when she, you know, she wasn't as sick as she is now with the disease, because she would ask more often. Now she barely asks, but I have to tell you a story. So my brother passed away. The way he passed, he was very actively involved in local theater, and they were rehearsing for a play, and he was on the stage, and somebody asked him, can you help me move this table off the stage? So imagine if you and I are taking a table. You're working forward with the table, I'm walking backwards. And he walked off a 3.5-foot stage and hit his head on cement and died instantly. Wow. So how that happened, like and no one on the stage, especially the person walking forward, not know that he or she was leading him. I never asked. I didn't want to know. I really didn't want to know. We couldn't bring him back. So anyway, he didn't die instantly. He was put on life support. We went down to South Carolina. The family all flew to where he lived, where he was in the hospital, to say our goodbyes. And then we came back up and we had a memorial service at our local church. And after that, I went to visit my mom. And as I shared, I didn't tell my mom anything. And I was really in a bad space because this had all happened, right? And I was trying to have a life visit with my mom. I would say this was like 2 days after the memorial service. And this is, again, in 2016. So she wasn't as progressed in her disease. And she looked at me and she said, I know something's wrong and you're not telling me. I could see it on your face. And I'll back up a second to say that one of the things that also helped me was spirituality. So I had a friend, a very close friend, who passed away in 2004. And before, she was very young. She was only 44 and she was leaving her young family. And she said, I am going to come to you, not just me, but collectively our friends, right? With what we call wings from beyond. Like this happens, like if a glass breaks at a gathering, that letting you know that I'm here, you know, after she passed. Or if you see dragonflies or sunflowers, whether it be the real thing or jewelry, you know, that means that I'm here. I'm showing you I'm here.
She told you this before she died?
Before she died, yeah. And she said, and songs, like if, you know, a song like Let It Be or Drops of Jupiter or something, which were her favorite song, come on a radio somewhere. And countless times through that whole year, she would give me these winks, right? So back to my mother. So she said to me, I know that something's wrong and you're not telling me. I can see it on your face. And I just said, no, Mom, I'm just having a very busy day at work. I need to leave. Kissed her goodbye, waved to her friends and got in the car and cried for about 10 minutes. And then I said, you know, we chose not to tell her, and this is our life. And I sat, and when I was composed myself enough to be able to leave, so that I would be able to drive, I hit the ignition on the car, and the song in the car on the radio was Let It Be. So that was my friend telling me, you made your decision. It was for the right reasons. And now let it be. Just let it be. And so those times when those little winks would come to me, you know, whether you believe in them or not, I do believe in them. When they would come to me, it made me feel less alone in this. Because even though I'm married, I have a husband, I have children, I have good friends, a good group of people that were my people, let's say, I still, in my own way, felt alone in the why me feeling, back then. I don't feel that way anymore, but back then, why me? Why my breasts? If I was in a room with 20 women, I'd say, why did I lose my breasts? Not that I want anybody else to, but why me? Or, why did my brother, my second brother, or what is my mom? Why did I lose my relationship with my mom? So that grief was just so profound and so big and heavy back then.
And it is lonely because nobody can know exactly what you're going through. Did you get stuck in that rut that many people often do of feeling just really let down by people around you? Or were you able to draw on your own resources early enough?
Yeah, I have to say, I did have very good people to support me during that time. Like, I have a good friend that I know since first grade who would call me every night and take time away from her family and her life and support me. And it was really, a lot of people rallied around me because they saw what happened to me, and they were worried. They were really worried about me. And it was just a very difficult period of time. There were some really, I don't want to say the word stupid, but just really raw comments. One woman said to me, well, you're lucky your husband stays with you after you had your breast removed. Like, as if my breast defined our relationship, I'm like, my relationship with Dan is not solely defined by my breast, And then I will say one thing I learned, I always like to share this just because it doesn't have to be with just loss of breast or if you're having something difficult and you share it with people, whether it be you're going through some mental health issues or you've lost something, you're sharing something that's really private to you, is to make sure that you communicate to whoever you're sharing that with what you want them to do with that information. Keep it private, because I didn't share that. I didn't say that to one person. And she told a whole bunch of people who I didn't even really know. And that was really difficult. So I always like to share that, because when you're going through something, and if you confide in somebody, to tell that person, listen, I really don't want you, this is just between you and I. And be very specific about how you feel about that, the information being communicated. Because all of a sudden I was getting phone calls from somebody that I had never even sat down and had a sip of water with. And they're calling me up to talk about my surgery. And the surgical journey itself was difficult enough to have to deal with that. Yeah. I'd like to spare people from that if I can, in anybody else's journey.
So reach out and share, but do so with discernment.
Yes, exactly.
Make it clear who the information is for.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really important, because I think with a lot of mental health campaigns, it's all about reach out, talk to someone, but that's not always the best thing. Sometimes you have to be really discerning who you do that with, and it's not necessarily going to be your inner circle of friends. Sometimes when we're having a tough time, those circles of friends don't always correspond with circles of support. Sometimes it's people we don't know so well who can end up being really supportive, and people who are very close who aren't. But I'm curious, Rosie, about you. You talked earlier on about, making this decision, or, realizing that you wanted to get yourself back. Did you get yourself back, or did you get back a different version? Or are you still getting yourself back?
I think that I got a better version of myself. And I'll go back to my friend Marianne, who passed many years ago. She was that person that would wake up and say, it's a beautiful day. We need to go to the park. We need to do this. And I'd be like, what? But, I feel like that my goal was to not only just rise up and come to where I was, let's say, but to find some way of finding some joy in every single day of my life. And that's what I do now. And I know we'll have bad days, whatever, but I want to be able to embrace the beautiful gift of now. That's what I call it. So I'll give you an example. So when I walk for exercise purposes to clear my head. I call it me time because I walk alone. And prior to this whole transition, if you will, I'd be fielding a phone call, I'd be looking at a text, maybe I look at an email, I have to answer this email, I'd stop. But now the whole purpose of that walk is to just take in the senses, like take in the blue sky, the clouds piercing the sun piercing the clouds. In my spiritual world, I feel that that's our loved ones shining their light down, and listening to the birds, like chirping. Actually like to look for them. I like to find them in the sky. And then just taking in like the sounds of children laughing, if you happen to hear, and just really stay. And another thing that happened to me the last year and a half is that I started to run again. And, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, lung and breast, and I'm not running marathons, but I'm running with a different feeling, a mindfulness kind of run, in that I'm not looking to make it to the stop sign or like if I just make it to that mailbox. Now I'm running and I'm listening to my feet hit the pavement and feeling proud that like I'm building up my strength in my body. Another thing I'll share is that I just recently went to see Sir Paul McCartney in concert. It was his last concert in the United States of the tour. And in the past, when I would go to a concert, I'd be taking video, and taking photos. Now we have to post it, right? We always have to post. We have to think of a cute caption for our post. And then I have to look how many likes we had. Do we have comments? Maybe I comment back. And now my feeling is that I'm not that interested in recording. I'm more interested in being in it and being totally invested and committed to that special experience, because I don't want to record it. I want to live it. So these are the ways, it's just a shift in the way that I thought and things that I do in my life. Same holds true for if I was having a dinner, let's say I was with a friend, my husband or a cousin, and my busy brain would go off into different places. Let's say, oh, you really could have handled that work email better earlier today. Or when you get home, you really should do a to-do list for tomorrow. And I'm not there. Now I pull myself back because I don't want to miss that experience with that person, right? So, and I started to train myself to do that, not only during those special times when I'm out, but even during my day-to-day. I will pull myself back to where I am, because it's important for me to stay in that moment, and not be casting off into different directions. And I know we all have obligations and responsibilities, but if I could do that, and I could strive for 75, 80% of the time being in that way, it allows me to find something joyful in every day. And one of the things, getting back to self-care, random acts of kindness brings joy to the person that you do it to, but also you get back tenfold. But it's not just kindness to others, it's kindness to myself. So in the morning, I write in my journal, today I will be kind to myself by doing blank. And then I make a commitment to do whatever blank is. It could be a bubble bath. It could be reading a book with the sun shining on me. It could be sitting and petting my pup. I lost one in January. Unfortunately, he passed away. But I make that commitment. And if I could strive for that, then I know that in every day, there's something that brings me joy. And that's self-care for me.
And that's how you have created a scaffolding for yourself to get you through these difficult times. How are you now, Rosie? How are things now?
Things are good for me personally, in my personal life for me, but my situation with my mom is getting worse. And I can't say that it doesn't drag me down. I mean, four times in a night, I don't know where I am. How did I get here? It's very difficult, very difficult. The pandemic was exceedingly hard for the elderly to be in isolation. I do believe that the decline in their health, maybe not the mental health and their disease, was worse because of the pandemic, because my mother she doesn't remember. So 30 times she's leaving her room and she's being told that she has to go back. And it was very difficult. I have to say, though, Liz, that the only way to get through those things is sometimes when you're not strong enough. When I know those times when I'm not strong enough, I can't pick up the phone. I can't answer it. I have to either hand it to my husband, or if one of my children are home, or just not answer the phone, because it's really too difficult to do so. And that, you know, again, that is maybe seems harsh to some people, but you know, it is a form of self-care for myself. Is sometimes if it's not, you know, it's not the good day for me, or just if I go and visit her, if I go for a visit and, you know, it's very heavy. Sometimes I stay and sometimes I don't. The reality is, though, she doesn't remember. She was in the hospital for 8 days, and with all the fear and the where's my purse and I want to go home, when a day after she got back, I said, do you know you were in the hospital? I wasn't in the hospital, you know. So sometimes it's difficult to do these things, but the decisions that I had to make that, you know, make it a little easier. I think one of the things that I've discovered recently, and it's really kind of wonderful though, is when we go back in the past and we talk about her childhood. You know, I've been doing this for a couple of years, but I'll tell you the wonderful part in 1 second. It makes the visit easier. Like if I speak to her, which she remembers, you know, so you're one of 6 children. What was it like growing up? You know, how were your brothers? What was your favorite thing that your mom made in terms of Italian cooking? But the wonderful thing that I found in the last year is that there's this little piece of my mother that's still there. And I record it now. And it's about food. It's recipes. So I will visit her and I'll say, hey, Mom, you know, my son, one of my sons, Gregory Jordan, I'll pick one of them. You know, Gregory wants to know how to make meatballs. And like that, it's like magic. She knows it. And it's almost always seamless that she knows the recipe for how to do that, or lasagna, or whatever it might be, you know, whatever Italian dish that we want to talk about that day. And it was Christmas Day of this past year. We took her out of the facility to have dinner at our house. And, you know, it was a big deal because they had been in isolation. They weren't, you know, we weren't really socializing that much with them. And we brought a companion that knows her. She actually lived with my mother back when my mother was living back in Brooklyn. She lived 24/7 with her, and her name is Penny. And I said, Penny, watch this. And I said, Mom, how do you make meatballs? And she just, everything, no repetitiveness, just like that. And I said, Penny, that's my mother. Mm. I did that without crying. That was a good one.
Yeah, and those glimpses of the past. I remember doing similar with my dad a year before he died. He was actually in hospital and we thought that might have been the end of his life. But I remember asking him what was the best day of his life, expecting him to say, you know, when I married your mother or when I became a father. But he said, when I was picked for the senior cup team rugby. And I was like, okay, and what was the worst day of your life? And he said, when I was dropped from the rugby team. Oh. So similar to your mom and meatballs, to talk to my father about rugby and his shenanigans when he was a young boy was always a way to get him back for a few moments. Yeah, and another one actually was the garden. You know, during COVID, I would walk around with the video on, FaceTiming him and show him what was growing in my garden. And he would always engage with that.
That's nice.
You have to be clever and creative in your communication. It's very humbling.
Mm-hmm. I will say also, I just wanted to share one more thing. When we pushed back tremendously about the transition from the assisted to memory care. So I remember, and it's very, even though you know how progressive their disease is, when the residents in assisted living started to make fun of my mother, I knew it was time for her to go. Like they, you know, even though, you know, they're spending, let's say 8 hours a day with her, like when she's not keeping up anymore and she's being redirected all day long. She keeps going to the med tech and she's, you know, no, it's not 5 o'clock, it's 10 a.m. and 10 a.m., you know. I recently learned, because she was in the hospital, when she came back to her apartment, we decided to have a companion stay 24/7 for a few days, just to make sure she was not weak and, you know, that she could make it to the bathroom on her own, and she would, you know, that she would be assisted. and that the companion said that she's starting to sundown now. She was getting up in the middle of the night to put clothes on and thinking she needed to go to a meal. So the decision was the right one. She needed to move from assisted into a place where it's simpler. It's almost like, I don't know if you have any experience with it, but it's just my second year of experience with it. They actually are like children then. They put cartoons on, they build a bear, they stuff an animal, and they cut, like I was there on, I was there Saturday this week. They were coloring books and pencils, but it's where she needs to be because it was too big a world for her. Yeah. The assisted living facility. And they love her. That's the best part about it. That, my maiden name is Jingola, and they call her by her last name, Jingola. And they come and they hug her. And, it just makes me feel really good that they care so much about the residents in there. So, and that's a hard one to do, is to find a place like that, to find a place where there's compassion from the staff to the level that I feel like put my head on my pillow at night and feel like we made the right decision.
Yeah, essential. And it makes all the difference to know that your loved ones are being cared for with genuine love and compassion. My father had several carers that took turns coming in, and they were just wonderful. And it made our lives so much easier. And like that, like you say, to be able to put our heads down at night on our pillows and actually sleep without having to worry. Yeah. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for your time. You've written a memoir, isn't that right?
I have. It's called Find Your Joy and Run With It. I have actually the cover, because we redesigned the cover, and it's really, I feel it's very pretty, and it demonstrates like the little pieces that fall off, but then basically it's about that story, about that year where the losses for me and the grief around that. But how do you build back after losing your brother, your breast, your mother, not physically, and getting to that level of being able to rise up and then find that joy. And when people have read it, they've come to book signings or whatnot and said that it really resonated with them, and they took parts of that, things that I did, and incorporated it into their lives. And I wrote it. It was basically a very started as my journal, because journaling was also very important in my healing, and went back to that space where everything was so raw and how I transitioned. And that was how the framework of the book came together. And, so it's really a story of renewal and revival, and how you can make yourself get out from adversity to emotional wellness.
And it's an unusual title for a book about grief and so much adversity, finding joy. But, like anything, there will be things that will resonate with some people and not with others. In Europe, we're quite adverse to sort of trying to put a positive slant on things. But I really want to honor that you've been through so much, and finding your meaning, finding your spirituality, finding your little cornerstone habits along the way have really helped you. And I've no doubt that somebody listening today or reading your book will also resonate with this experience. We've all got to just keep the ears open and learn from each other, because we all have different ways of navigating loss. For some people, it's to stay in the pit. And for others, it's, I want to find my joy. I don't want to stay here. And everybody has their own unique personal way of finding that. So I wish you well as you continue this ongoing navigation of grief as you care for your mom.
Thank you.
Care for the management of her. And I'll think of her when I'm next cooking meatballs.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, she's a special person, and finding that part of her that was still in there was just such a beautiful gift. It really was. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation.